Hello, everybody. We are working today on Unit 4, which covers Chapter 4 in our book. And the topics for Chapter 4 are listed on the screen here. This is kind of the overview or the 10-mile view. And we'll kind of dig into the author's PowerPoint here and kind of go through all the major issues. One thing I was just pointing out to the class here is just remember that case study solutions are posted here in the unit folder, match up with your book. And you should always check your case studies against the author's solution by coming here, loading it up, and then you can do a right-click view source or an inspect. The view source is really the preferred way to just see the code. That code is important to get correct as you move forward from one chapter to another, so make sure that you do that. And if you ever get stuck with that, please let me know. I do hope to actually start adding my examples, and I'm going to make a clone of this and move it over to Prometheus and start adding my examples from this class to that list. And I'm sorry I have not done that yet, but that will be coming pretty soon. All right, this is a fresh recording of this material. It's been a few years, I noticed, since I recorded it, so I guess it's about time. So welcome to Chapter 4. This is on the 10th edition of the Terry Felke-Morris book. The learning objectives as listed in the book. I'm just going to let you read those real quickly on your own. There's a couple of pages of them. A lot of it has to do with images, formatting, how images work on a page, and a bunch of other really, I think, really helpful information for people first venturing into doing this for the first time. Now, the very first tag they're throwing at us, they're throwing a singular tag at us. And you know what, frankly, I'm not even ready to code yet. I don't have my code editor up, but I'm going to do that. And, you know, part of this is I want to make sure that we kind of follow certain types of procedures as we work. And I try to like kind of bounce between tools from week to week as much as I can. For the most part, I've been coding in Notepad++, and you guys are already aware of that. But I'm set to make a switch this week, and I'm going to actually switch to what I consider my preferred HTML editor, which is a product from Adobe called Dreamweaver. So I'm just going to go to my Start menu here and find my version of Adobe Dreamweaver. This is a subscription-based product at this point. It is not a free product, although you can get free trials for it. This is a paid product, so it is not free. I am going to close all the stuff that I have open on the screen here with Dreamweaver, and I'm going to start by talking, what I always do in any coding class is I usually have some sort of initial foundation in like file management, like how important that is with all the coding tasks that you do. When you do work with Dreamweaver, and I know there's a few of you out there that use this as your editor because I've seen your screenshots and stuff, so I think this will be particularly helpful for those people, is Dreamweaver kind of, when you start to work on projects instead of Dreamweaver, Dreamweaver likes it that you create what we call a site definition, which is just their way of saying, can you tell us what folders your work is in? That's really what it is. And that helps you to keep organized, and then really also teaches you the fact that a folder structure really is your website, especially when you're dealing with static HTML. They do have this site tool up here at the top in their menu. And, normally, I mean, if you're creating a new site, you come up here and you click New Site. I usually prefer to actually go to the Manage Sites option, and you can notice that I have different profiles already set up for my Apollo accounts, but I have not done that for Prometheus on here yet, so I'm kind of like due to do it. So from here, I'm going to click New Site, and it brings up this dialog. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name the site, I'm going to point it to the right folders, and give it the FTP login information so that Dreamweaver can handle my FTP for me, right? So this is what's kind of cool about a product like this, is FTP is built in. I don't have to leave the product to look at the results. The other thing I don't have to do is it also has a live preview, where I have a Chrome-based code browser in the product that shows me what the web page looks like in the browser before I even get to the browser. Other tools do not do that, right? Very few, actually very few tools do that. There are plenty of other tools that have FTP built in. I still like FileZilla better than the FTP tool here, but I am comfortable using it since I've done it so much. Right, what I'm going to name this is web programming, and I'm going to abbreviate web prog. I'm just going to say FA22, which is my shorthand for fall of 22. I'm going to go find the folder that I'm using to store my work, and that's going to be in my web programming. So that's 152.101. If you remember, I made a 2022 fall folder, and then I have all my unit folders. So this is where all my stuff is, right? But right now I'm in the root folder. So what will be here is all the stuff that pertains to this class. So I'm going to go ahead and select the folder. All right, so that's my local site folder where all my work is stored. Okay. I want you to notice that there is a little box here where if you use what we call a source repository, with GitHub probably being the biggest one, it has a little checkbox right here where you can log into your account and store your code directly on your repository. So if anybody already does GitHub and knows what it is, here's a way where you can log into it, and instead of storing to a local folder on your machine, you would store to the cloud in GitHub. So that's a possibility, not one that I'm exercising here today. On the left-hand side here, I'm now going to the servers tab. And what this allows me to do is put in my FTP information, right? So this is where a lot of code editors fall short, okay? Some products that do have this built in, if you're using any of the JetBrains products and you use in particular like WebStorm or PHPStorm, which are designed for doing web work, they do have an FTP client built in, and the side panels come up very similar to the Adobe products here. All right, so I'm going to name the server. I'm connecting to Prometheus, and you can call it whatever you want, but that's the name of the server. We're using FTP. If you are connecting to a different type of FTP server, so some commercial services, for example, require secure connections and really cryptic passwords and stuff, those capabilities are here. We're using plain old FTP. The address is the same one we put into FileZilla. So I'm just going to put prometheus.gtc.edu. And then I'm going to put in my username, which I think I have an all A account on that machine. We'll find out in a second here. And then my password, let's see if I can remember that. That seems to be kind of a challenge half the time too, is just remembering that. Then they have a test button. So hopefully, excellent. So I put in my username and password, it connected, it said you were successful. So great. Now here on Prometheus, I have a little bit of an issue because I don't know what my root directory is, because really I think I have one just for this class. And if I name things the way that I normally name things, so you get like hearing how I'm talking here, I can put that name in and have the right folder name, but frankly, I forgot. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do to figure that out, is I'm actually going to bring up FileZilla really quick, connect to Prometheus. I'm not going to install a new version right now. Of course, the box comes up. Connect up to my account. All right, and the only reason I'm doing this is to see what that folder name is, right? Because everything for this class that on my local machine is in fall 2022 folder is in the web programming folder here, right? So you see, even though there are two different file names, I need to know what this folder name is so that stuff ends up in the right place, right? So there's a unit 2, I did a unit 3, right? So here's my web programming stuff. So I'm going to click on that. There's the fall folder. Unit 2 is here, unit 3 is here. I don't know how updated this is. You see, it's different, right? But I didn't move my Java Jam over. But the ideal would be that both folders are the same on both sides. I can move my unit 3 over, and then you know what? I'm going to be creating a unit 4 folder 2, right? That's where I'm going to work today. I could create that here. I could create it inside of Dreamweaver, or I could create it on my file system. I have all these options. This is kind of weird, right? So what normal people would probably do is come here, open up the file folder, find it, you know, wherever it is, and then go ahead and make the Unit 4 folder. And you know what? That might be the best option. So now I want you to consider, I could create the folder from scratch, but I am going to be building on the work from before. So I'm just going to actually copy the whole darn folder and paste it in, and then rename it to Unit 4. And then as I go inside that folder, I will see that I have my HTML basics. That's my personal project, really. And you know what? I could rename it at this point. I could actually call it like House of Dragon, you know, or House of the Dragon, right? Because that's what my project is. Because it's not really the HTML basics. In fact, why don't I just do that? That seems like pretty wise to me, to name the folder what the project is. So I'm going to call it House of the Dragon, all lowercase. That's kind of hard to read. So you might, and I'm just suggesting, use dashes instead of spaces. Now the question is, could I use spaces? Yes, you could use spaces, but it makes for a messy URL, so I don't suggest it. All right, so that's where I'm going to do all of my work today, is in that particular folder, the House of the Dragon folder, at least for the demos. If I was working on case studies, those would go here. Of course, I'm not working on those, you guys are, by the way. All right, so the folder is created. I can come back over here to FileZilla and refresh, and I see my Unit 4 folder. If I want, I could preemptively upload it. Now, here's the thing. I know I'm going to change all this stuff and I'm going to upload it later, but now it's already on Apollo, right? Or excuse me, Prometheus. Right. So going back to Dreamweaver to answer this question, the root directory here is web prog. And I forget what syntax they want me to use. I don't know if they want me to do it like this or put the slash in front. But let's go save, and then it seems to be okay. There are some other settings that you can set in here, but for now, this is enough, just enough to connect to the server and enough to get the site definition. So on a local level here, what happens is they have this little panel in Dreamweaver, and you can actually enable that panel from the window menu to see your files. And a lot of IDEs are like this, where you can see your files. So it shows the current folder. It shows my local versions of my files. It has this little tool here that I can click. And then when I hit this little icon, this is the connect icon, it will connect to Prometheus. So now this is where the mind bender is. In FileZilla, your stuff is on the left and Prometheus is on the right. Here, it's the other way around. These are my local files. Thank God they like title it right here. It says local files, and this is the remote server, Prometheus. So I can use this interface to like drag and drop files or upload or do whatever I do right inside the product, right? I don't want to be in this mode, so I'm going to exit out, but I do want to work on my current version, my most current version. So I'm in my Unit 4 folder, in the House of the Dragon folder, and I'm going to go ahead and open my index page. All right, so here's the code. I want you to notice how the code looks in here. You know, Dreamweaver does a certain type of color coding and aesthetic. Chances are, if you are using this, also, if you know, there's a couple of you that use this product, you know, your font size is probably significantly smaller. You may have different panels open up on the screen, but just real quick preview, like when you're working in this kind of a view, this is what we call code view. Now, most of the time I'm working in here, that's my view, right? Because I'm mostly working on the code directly. But you can also do a split screen, which is the code and the page at the same time, or what we call live view, which is exactly how the browser would render it. This is based on the Chrome code engine. So it's like having Chrome built directly into the product. So this is really cool. And one of the reasons why it's cool is because not only can I look at what it looks like, but I can change the content as I'm looking at it, which is kind of a mind blower, right? You can't really do that with the standard IDE. So one of the reasons I like this product a lot is because of that. Now, another interesting thing this product does is as we create links to related documents, those documents are automatically brought up with the index file. So I have the index file here. It sees a link to the style sheet. So right here, it creates kind of like this secondary view, and I can go right to the style sheet directly from the code file. So I don't have to go hunting for that CSS. It's right there already attached. As you create really complicated HTML files where you might have a few CSS files or a few JavaScript files attached to it, all of those would appear here as bubbles and you could switch to them directly. So I think that's really kind of a neat feature. You will notice that it is picking up some errors, right? So here's, for example, this red highlight in the margin is saying special characters must be escaped. So in other words, they're saying that this ampersand here is not allowed. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there's a, you know, the reason the ampersand is not allowed is because we use like these kind of special character things, right, that start with an ampersand. So if I want to do an ampersand, I'm supposed to go ampersand amp semicolon, and then it takes care of that, you know. So just an example of fixing an error. So how does it do the code correction? This has the W3 validation also built right into the product, by the way. So it sends the code off to W3, validates it, and sends it back. I do find that both the IntelliSense on this product and the code correction features are really pretty awesome in terms of, you know, how they work and how they help you code more efficiently. A lot of really cool productivity tools are built in here, particularly on the CSS side. So when you get to the point and you're writing some pretty complicated CSS, there's actually a CSS Designer panel here on the side that allows you to control a lot of your things with drag and drop, by the way, as opposed to typing the code. So you can come over here, simply like drag across a margin, it sets it for you and it writes the CSS code for you. You don't have to code it. Pretty slick, right? Is it cheating? No, it's not cheating. That's just a tool, right? Is it cheating to use the cruise control on your car? Totally not. You know, it's there, so you use it, right? All right, so that's just kind of a little bit of a preview. I'm going to stay in file mode for right now, but I'm going to be doing all my work inside of here. And I'm actually going to go ahead and save a little bit of edit that I already did. All right, so that's kind of that. But we're being asked now, back to the PowerPoint, all this to get to doing a horizontal rule, is to add a horizontal rule to our page. And HR is really just kind of a simple way to put a line across your page. Now, you probably see this on websites, don't really think too much about it, but the tag is really simple. It's a self-closing tag. They're putting one right above the footer. And you know what? I'll tell you what, I see no reason not to do the same thing. So I'm going to do that, and I'm actually going to put it in between the main and in between the footer. That's how I'm going to do it. It's going to type an HR tag, and it stands for horizontal rule. An alternate way you can type this, by the way, is you can do this too. Space and a slash, that works as well. But typically we just type HR. So I'm going to go ahead and add this here and save it. And then I'm going to do a preview in the browser. And all right, so I'm going to choose Chrome here, but you can see I could access any of the browser choices that I have on the system. All right, so here it comes up. And then way at the bottom here, I want you to notice the horizontal rule. So that's a horizontal rule. I think it can be pretty helpful. And in fact, I think that looks pretty good right above the footer. I don't know if you guys agree or not. So it might not be a bad idea to put that above the footer on the About page too. So let's do that. So I'm going to go back over to Dreamweaver now. I'm going to open up my About page. And then I'm going to add that HR tag in the same exact spot for consistency and look. So in between the main tag and the footer tag, I'm adding an HR. Right, so I see a red highlight here. So somewhere it's saying that I got a broken paragraph. Aha. So notice it says here, so I see a paragraph, but that's closed. I see a paragraph and that's not closed. So thank you, Dreamweaver. See, this is the kind of advantage that you have working with that product. Let's save that. And if I go back here now, notice how I didn't even refresh this, folks. I just came back to the browser and it was like there. And so this is kind of another one of these kind of killer features here of how this works. And I'm trying to trigger this like Windows 11 side-by-side mode thing. Still kind of getting comfortable with this. There we go. So I can go there, and then the other one can be Dreamweaver. And I think what they're really trying to show you is, like, if I am changing something here, notice how it changed in the browser right away. And I think that's, and this is in the browser, so it live updates to the browser directly when I'm making edits. So if I'm using Dreamweaver, I can see the changes immediately. Now, fair warning, that can be both a good thing and a bad thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. Like if you're doing layout things and you need to change 10 things to get where you're going, looking at the first change in progress might show you something that's horribly broken. So please be aware of that, that sometimes it's not good to preview until you make all your changes. All right, I'm going to go back now and bring up the product. Let's move on to the next slide. So one thing that really becomes kind of interesting is you start to realize that when you put web page content on the page, sometimes it's good to kind of like have things stand out from other things, and you can put, for example, a border around things. And in this case, you're putting a border around an H2, and they're really kind of addressing three separate things here. So border width, border style, and border color. And what's kind of fascinating about this is that we just say border as our command, and then the first piece of information is the width, the second one is the style, and the third one is the color. And so I'll demonstrate all three of these here. Now, I'm not sure as I look at my page, and so I'm going to kind of take a look here. Is that where I really want do I want a border around my H2? Well, that's what they did, right? So I might actually put a border around my header. I'm going to do, so what I'm going to do is something a little bit different than what they're doing in the slide, but I'm going to put a border around all the whole top part of the page is what I'm going to do. So back over to the coding engine, I am going to switch over to my CSS page, and I'm going to find my code for the header. So you see the header here. Now the header contains both this H1 and this H2. Okay. So let's start first by just saying border, and we'll follow the technique that they use. They did 2 pixels, solid, and then a color. Now here's another nice thing about Dreamweaver. Notice the color picker is built into the product. I don't have to go external to get a color. I'm not sure what a good color is here. I might actually go for something kind of, maybe kind of like the color of this font, but maybe, I don't know, maybe black is actually okay. So you know what? I'll just click that, copy that code. I do want you to notice that this is coming up in a different kind of format than what we're used to, but you could do hex, you could do one of these other formats. I'm actually going to use the RGBA approach, which is just generated here, but I can also say black if I wish, but I just want to show you this is really functionally the equivalent of black, and I really don't necessarily need that 4th number in there. We'll talk about that pretty soon. All right. So you'll notice up on top here, because this is in split screen mode, that it put the border around it right away. All right. Okay. You might not like it, or maybe you do. I really don't know like what your aesthetic is. But what I find really cool about this product is I can come in here and make changes. So if I don't like 3 pixels, heck, I can make it 8 pixels, and you can see how that looks. And maybe that's the look I'm going for. So maybe I want 8 pixel solid border around my header. All right. Now, just to show you the color thing again, I could just type this in as black, and I just want you to see that it stays that way. Or if I wanted like green, for example, it just does it. See how easy that is, right? And one of the advantages of working with this product is seeing those instantaneous changes on the screen. Otherwise, I would have to save it and go back to my browser and look. And that's fine too. If you want to do it like that, that's absolutely a fine way to do it. But so far, I like that. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of this statement. The other thing that I think would kind of look good here, and I'm going to escape out, is maybe a background. And in fact, I'm going to do background color on this. This might benefit from some sort of a background color. I want you to notice here in this product that not only does it have a quick link to the color picker, but it also has official names of all the colors. So if I wanted to use, I don't know, light pink or light salmon or whatever the official, medium purple, whatever you think that a good color would be for this. I'm not really sure what a good color is for this. It seems to me to be kind of a weird, let's do powder blue. And so there you go. All right. Maybe not the prettiest thing on the planet, but you guys get the point, right? So this is a background color for this header. So I got a border around it, and then we have some of these alternate things. Now, the slideshow will show this in just a few minutes. But one thing that's really helpful to know in CSS is how to comment out your code. So the way that you comment out your code is you use a / and a star, and then end it with a star and a / like so. So you guys see the characters here? / star, star / So what I did is I turned off the border command on purpose. And the reason I did that is I want to show you that the border command is one of these special types of CSS commands that can be issued both in combination and individually. So when the slide shows you this conglomerated way of putting width, style, and color together, it's also telling you that I could declare each one of these separately. And often coding engines like Dreamweaver would prefer to do it that way. So for example, I can say border width, right? And we already determined 8 pixels seem pretty cool to us, right? Now it doesn't have a color, so I also have to say border dash color to have that show up. And we just decided black, I think, right? Was a good color. So there's black. So you notice it's still not appearing though? Okay, so that's because we still have to determine border dash style. And so this is one of the reasons why, they usually type it as one command. But the secondary thing is you can type it all separately. There's other options other than solid. For example, there's dashed or dotted, right? Okay, for whatever it's worth, that doesn't look that great to me. I think solid looks just fine in this case. But this is just an example of how you can split those into 3 separate commands, or eliminate the part with the dash. And if you know all the different subtypes in their syntax, you can just add them to one single border command. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to move the comment marks, and I'm going to comment out the individual approaches and leave the singular approach in place. Because, okay, what do real programmers do? Most real programmers, if they're typing it by hand, will do this approach because it's easier, right? But we're declaring the thickness of the border what style the border is, in this case, a solid line, and then black. Okay. So that's how you do a border. Interestingly, you know, you can do these borders, and I want you to see what happened. Like for my output, I put the border on the header tag, and the header is what we call a block level item, which fills its entire container, and it goes beyond the size of the words. So in other words, there's a container in here that keeps it to this point. But if that container wasn't there, so for example, this width here, right, if that was set to 100%, oops, my numlock is turned off, of course. And now my insert's pressed. So batting 1,000 here. So 100%. See how that fills the whole screen, because otherwise we were, you know, kind of limiting the screen to 80%, if you remember, right? But it fills the entirety of whatever that is. The next example is to show you that if you want, you could put a block level type border on an inline element. So an anchor tag is one of those, like a link, can have a box around it like that. Now, I don't think that's really a particularly good look, so I'm not going to add it to my page, but that's possible. But a block level element will fill the whole screen, even if the words don't. An inline element will just go around those words. An anchor tag is an inline element, by the way. Now, the kind of borders you can display, this is kind of interesting, right? So this they're showing you in Firefox, and I think this is really kind of interesting. I'm using Chrome right now, but these are all the different border styles you can use. So there's the default is no border, right? So if you say border default, that's what you get, or you say border none, this is what you get, no border. But otherwise, you can see I use solid, so it just creates a solid line all the way around. But these various ones, it's kind of hard to really kind of make out what they are, honestly, unless you kind of zoom in. So I showed you dashed and dotted. Those have some, you know, usability, but then there's what we call inset, outset, double, which, you know, you can't really tell from this, but there's two lines there. And I suppose I could probably click way in. Really, really hard to see, but there's two lines. Then there's groove, which makes it look like it's like a sunken line, or ridge, which makes it look like a raised line, right? Or the inset outset, which is kind of like tries to make it look three-dimensional. You know, like the outset, the light seems to come from the top left. Inset, it seems to come from the top or bottom right. You know, you can choose whatever you want with those. You know, from a practical standpoint, you know, my advice is most of the time I use solid, right? And that's just me. And you can use it in a bunch of really kind of interesting ways. So the first thing that you think about is if you're putting a border on something, you think, because the thing is a rectangle, right? It's a block level element, it goes all the way around. Well, here's kind of the weird thing about this. Because the border element is highly controllable. So you saw like thickness, color, and style. You can also control which side of the box it goes to. So this is the real mind blower. I can have, with one command, a border all the way around, or if I want, I can have a different border on the top, a different border on the right, different on the left, and different on the bottom. Or just one of those, or just two of those, or whatever, you know. And so like one clever thing that they're doing here, so this is something that you might choose to do, is you could just do a border bottom. This looks pretty thick, so it's probably like 4 or 5 pixels and red. Now, we didn't draw the other borders, but this kind of creates a look, right? I mean, it's kind of a cool look. I also see people will, for example, just put a border on the left. So I'll give you an example. So here for my paragraphs, and this is really an odd placement for it, I'm just going to say border dash left And then I can do, you know, all the standard stuff. So I could do something really crazy like 15 pixel border, solid red like this. And then I want you to look at my paragraphs. I'm not saying this looks good, by the way. I'm just saying that here it is. You know, so take it for what it's worth. I don't think that's a good look, but I can do it, right? So this is not a good look, but you can create some interesting effects this way, just with your imagination. You know, so if you're thinking of like maybe putting a line somewhere or a margin or a block, I've seen it very cleverly used, by the way. Another thing that becomes kind of interesting here is this property that we call padding, right? So this is really kind of a weird one too, because whenever we start to throw a border in, we start to notice that borders around things sometimes get uncomfortably close to the words. And now you might look at this bottom box here and go, what's wrong with that? Well, here's what I see wrong with it. It's like the H, I don't know if it's touching the left edge, but it's really, really close. And that G is kind of touching on the bottom here. And you know what? I don't think that looks as good as this. The difference is here we added what we call padding, which creates 5 pixels of space inside the border in between the word. So it's like kind of pushing in from all sides of that box. Now, what I'm going to do here to demonstrate this is I might have to, and I'm going to save my about file here. I might have to do this. I guess I can do it on my about page. I think that would be okay. I'm going to kind of look at the content, and I'm going to maybe put like an H2 or an H3 or something kind of in here somewhere. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do this first with code. So I'm not going to do it in the header or the nav. I might do it in the main body. So below the first paragraph, oops, there. Let's go ahead and create an H2. And I'm just going to call it whatever. Okay, this is just demonstration purposes only. Now, the first thing you notice is it took on the style of the other H2 because there's, you know, a style attached to it. Right? So you see this looks just like that, or real similar. But mostly the H2 styling, if I look at my CSS, is letter spacing and the color of the font. Okay, that's fine. But I want to put a border around this with padding. I don't want to apply it to all the H2s. What I would rather do is keep that H2 separate. So I'm going to add a class to it, equals, oh gosh, I got to come up with a class name here. How about whatever padding? Okay, pretty lame name, but hey, that's the best thing I got this morning or afternoon. So I'm going to copy this now, and now I'm going to go over to my CSS style sheet, and I'm going to add that. I'm going to put it right here below this H2. You can put it way at the bottom of your document. And because it's a class, I have to start with a dot. And then notice Dreamweaver picked up an unused one, so it just added it for me. So I just add that in, add my curly brackets. And here's where I'm going to throw in, and I'm going to do this kind of on purpose here, is I'm going to add a border, and we'll make it 2 pixels solid black, just so I can see it. So you can see, already see it on the screen above. Right? See how that appeared? And now I'm going to go ahead and add padding. And the book used 5 pixels, which is okay, but I'm going to be a lot bolder, and I'm going to go 30 pixels because I really want it to be apparent. So take a look at what that did, box-wise here. Is that created this space inside this box? Now you might think that's cool, you might not think that's cool. I don't know, right? The point is the padding with 30 pixels of space is the space that you see from, I'm trying to get my drawing tools here. So this here is padding, and the space from here to here is padding, and the space from here to here is padding, and whatever that 30 pixels is, we have that over here too. So if these words came all the way across, they would stop here. But really what we've done is we've created 30 pixels of space all the way around that. And just as a helpful tip, you guys, padding is one of those things that you should apply liberally, is usually what I tell people. Things look better on a screen when you put a little bit of space around them, as opposed to the words touching the edge of the box. And just to kind of demonstrate that, let's come in here, and I'm just going to take that padding and cut it, and watch that whatever box, right? Do you like this look? Or do you like that look? And I like this look better. I like more spacing, looks better to me. I could very easily, once again, add a little bit of background color. Oops. And you can pick something that's different than the background being used right now. Now, so people choose carefully, right? Not all colors work well, right? So that there's an example of a color that doesn't work too well. If I apply that padding technique, when I look at this House of the Dragon thing, I notice a lot of issues with it, real frankly, right? I would think, the space on the top looks great. The sides look great, but the bottom doesn't look great. So what I might do with that one is I might go back to the heading or the header area here, and I might just selectively add padding to the bottom only. So like the border, I can apply it all at once, all the way around, or I can apply it to any side that I want selectively. In fact, I can use different values for all of them, but for this, I'm going to add a 20 pixel padding to the bottom of this, and you see how it gave it just a little bit of space. And I might even go up a little higher. I might go up to like 25, and that looks better balanced to me, right? So you see how like the spacing up top here looks good. And these are the kind of things that you start to look at as a web developer is, does that look good? Does that work? Is that okay, right? And so just a helpful tip. So that's an example of padding, and keeping in mind that padding can be applied all the way around. And then you can also, here's an example, apply it selectively to each side as much or as little as you want. So you might look at that heading with border that they have as an example, and I see the padding on the left, and I go, 5 pixels looks like way too little to me, right? I would double or triple or quadruple that to make it look more comfortable. Highly subjective though, right? But I always think that when you're working with backgrounds and containers, you never want to touch the edges is kind of my helpful suggestion. There is the ability with padding, and this is kind of weird, that you can use a shorthand. And this will kind of lead us to this little thing that I do. And I'm going to try to draw this, and this is maybe a mistake. In fact, here, you know what? I'm going to actually type it. And so if you look at like this blue box as an example, we have the top, right, bottom, and left. And I want you to think about this here. We can control each one of those sides separately. And I know right's kind of blurred out there, but when we have this ability with padding to actually use multiple terms as we describe the padding, it works in kind of a really strange system. So the general thing that I tell people, you should memorize this little acronym, which is TRBL. right? And the great way to remember it is to remember trouble. And what it means is top, right, bottom, left. And if you think about that, it's like going around a clock. It's clockwise, starting at the top. TRBL, top, right, bottom, left. And so in other words, we can control those individually. So if I use, and I'm going to demonstrate here, and then I'll go back to the slide. Okay, let me get rid of the drawings. On this particular box, the whatever box, and it has its own little class here, right? The whatever, yeah, so I use whatever all the time, right? Whatever padding, right? That's what I called it. And with the padding here, I declared 30 pixels, which means it's 30 pixels all the way around, right? But if I start listing these terms individually, so I can do, for example, just padding left. This is kind of the one slide example. And in this case, I'm going to use a really big number so you can see it, like 100 pixels, right? So it moved whatever way over. The point of the last slide that we were on is you can use this combination syntax where in the order of top, right, bottom, left, I can do this, watch. 50 pixels on top, 30 pixels on the right, you won't even see it because the words are too far away. 80 pixels on the bottom, and then 90 pixels on the left. And so I can individually, and notice how Dreamweaver tells me what they are. This is another nice thing about this product, right? So we do padding. So this is top, right, bottom, and left. When I use 4 terms, I can address each side separately. So that's pretty handy. Now in the book example, they did this. They only did 2 terms. So if you only do 2 terms, I want you to see what happens here. And yeah, I want to get that little box up. So the first term controls the top and the bottom. The second term controls the right and the left, right? Now there is a third approach where you can do this. You can have a third term, and this one always blows my mind. So it's the top one and the bottom one separately, the first and the last one, and the middle one's the left and the right. So you can use 4, 2, or 3. I'm not a big fan of the 3 because I always forget which ones it affects. But you know, this is why you have Dreamweaver. But I very commonly see where designers will use all 4 sides, right? And it's so much easier than listing them out like this little graphic here. But you could do it that way too. Either one works fine. But there's an example of padding where the sides are individually controlled. And this is kind of a theme that you see, right? So here's the 2 terms, just top and bottom, left and right. 4 terms, top, right, bottom, left. How do you remember it? Trouble, TRBL, trouble, right? Top, right, bottom, left in that order. Right? From here, they kind of go in here and they start to give you a little bit of practice. And really what they're trying to get you to do is start thinking about your personal website and where this kind of stuff might apply. It's not unusual for like headings to be a certain color and different background. You know why? Because it helps to create separation on the page. Right? Just a matter of envisioning it. So they have a couple of little examples here. All right. You have a little checkpoint, and I don't usually answer these, but this might be kind of pertinent. It says, is it reasonable to try to code a web page that looks exactly the same on every browser and platform? Here's my answer. Yes, it is reasonable. However, you should be aware that all browsers will show certain things differently. A really good example is when you learn how to code a button, you'll bring it up on the Mac OS and it'll look one way. Then you'll bring it up in Firefox and it looks a different way. And then you bring it up in Chrome and it looks a different way, all because of the default of how the buttons appear on that operating system. It has nothing to even do with the browser, right? However, so I think it's reasonable to try to do that, but sometimes you run into problems. You can code around it though. You know, there's ways to code around it. All right, so this is kind of interesting. When a web page containing the style rules below is rendered in a browser, the browser does not display. Describe what is incorrect with the following code. What's incorrect with this code? There's something wrong with this code. What do you think? What's wrong with this code?
There's no semicolon.
Okay, I heard Jamie say it, but Roman, you were saying? The 6 zeros in that's actually a valid hex code. What Jamie noticed right away, and Jamie, you're correct, is there should be a semicolon right here, right? You can't have two styles without a semicolon in between. My suggestion is always put the semicolon even on the last one. Technically, the last one doesn't need it, but I'm just going to tell you, chances are you probably add more styles and you forget, and then it doesn't work, and you're like, why isn't it working? And that's the why. Okay, true or false? CSS can be used to configure visual elements such as rectangular shapes and lines on web pages. True, very, very, very true, by the way. All right. All right, so we learned some kind of fundamental basics here, and ultimately we're going to kind of get back over to this next week, and we're going to talk about what we call the CSS box model, by the way. I'm going to give you just a tad bit of a preview right now. If I can find a browser window here, well, it looks like I have Firefox on screen that I don't have here. So let's bring up a new Chrome window. And I'm just going to do a really quick search here for what the CSX box model is. And generally speaking, you guys, this is the CSS box model. You know, margin, border, padding, and content. And what we learned a little bit of today, right? More next week, by the way, is a little bit of border and a little bit of padding. We also did a little bit with margins in the previous week, but when we get to the next week, we start to realize that what happens is these things come with every object that goes on the screen, right? So every object has these available to them, and then it's up to you how much of those you want to use, right? So if do you want margin, border, and padding on every item? Probably not. In some cases, you use those very extensively. In some cases, not at all. But this is what we call the CSS box model, and drives a lot of the placement of things on pages when we work with CSS, by the way. All right, I'm going to move forward now into the graphics portion of the day, and this is really kind of cool because honestly, so far we've been putting words on the page and we're throwing a little color in. Now we're starting to make some boxes, and I'm hoping you guys can start to feel the excitement of the possibility of adding pictures to your page, right? Because that is like a thing. In fact, it's really, when they came out with the graphical browser, it was the images on the page that made it the killer feature. And then when you could like move a mouse and click on the image, like, whoa, you know, it was like major, you know, I assure you, like 30 years ago, that was like a thing, right? Because that we didn't have web with images prior to that. And then when they figured out how to render images, it was like, oh my God, you know, the world has changed. You know, it was like really, I mean, it really kind of felt like that back then. Now, we use a lot of different kinds of file formats for images, and some of you guys may already be familiar with this. But these are probably the three most popular graphic image formats that you find on the internet. So we have GIFs, JPEGs, and PNGs. I would argue that there's several other ones that could be added to the list here, including bitmaps, TIFFs, JPEGs spelled different ways, and then this new file format called WebP. So WEBP, which, by the way, is just another fancy way to say PNG, I've discovered. So whenever I see a WebP image, I can just change the file extension of that to PNG, and it works, by the way. So you guys should know that. But these are the three most commonly used formats, and we kind of go through them, you know, describing them based on the order in which they were kind of developed. You know, so the GIF format stands for Graphics Interchange Format. It is not the best of file formats, but has a couple of features about it that make it kind of particularly interesting. first of all, this is a proprietary file format. So this was developed by a company called CompuServe back in the days when internet access wasn't really internet access, and you would use services like AOL or CompuServe or Prodigy. I'm trying to think of all the big players back then, but they were kind of canned systems. And CompuServe came up with a way, before we were using web browsers, to put images on the screen, and they developed the file format called GIF, which allowed for up to 256 colors. That was kind of a big deal at the time, but because that's kind of a lot of colors. And the other thing that was really cool about it, it can also be configured to be transparent. So the image doesn't have to be square. It could be a circle, and you could be see through or past the circle, right? So technically the image is really square, but there's parts of it you can see through. So the transparency was really cool. And then, as a lot of you already know, when you see an animated image on the web, usually we call those GIFs, right? I mean, and we think of them as animation. So GIFs have the ability to have kind of like multiple snapshots of the same image, and you can simulate movement with it, which is, so it's transparent and it can move. Really cool, right? All right. Kind of fails in one regard though. If I'm, working with a GIF, 256 colors is cool, transparency is cool, and animation is cool. But if I want to put a photograph on the screen, GIFs fail horribly because of their limited color range. And this is why when we buy a digital camera or a phone, when it saves a picture with the camera, it never saves it as a GIF, right? Because it's a horrible format for photographic quality. So they came up with this alternate format called Jpeg, which was really used by kind of like the art world. And I want you to notice the spelling here is with an E in it, right? And you can use actually that file extension for JPEGs with 4 letters with an E in it. Most commonly, we see it with just JPG, right? What JPEGs do really well is because they can, report up to 16.7 million colors, right? So colors maybe we can't even perceive. You can have a photograph where you have, for example, and this is what you look at where you can tell like a JPEG, for example, versus like a GIF or a PNG, is with a JPEG, I look at the sky, and when I look at the sky, I realize the sky is not one shade of blue, nor is the water. The sky is actually maybe like 50 shades of blue. It's kind of like lighter down here and grayer, and then it gets bluer as you go up. And if I was to use a GIF, the GIF would have to approximate, and then we would see like lines of blue on the screen. And in fact, I'll kind of give you an example. If you guys ever watch Netflix, like on a device, and you have a low bandwidth connection, one of the first things it does is it drops down the resolution of the images in the video. So then like a sky will have like streaks of blue, and maybe you guys have seen that, right? Because your bandwidth's not fast enough to give you the full resolution. But in a JPEG, when we take a photograph, and this is a general rule of thumb, whenever you have a photographic image on a web page, the JPEG is the preferred format. It is the most efficient at putting a large image on the screen with full color resolution. All right, so JPEGs also can be highly compressed, so you can have them like coming off of a camera nearly uncompressed, or being highly compressed to make them super small, file size wise. Now, they had these 2 formats, and those were the main 2 formats on the web for a really long time. And then somebody is like, you know what? Wouldn't it be cool if we could have something that could do what JPEG does, which is to give us all the colors and the color depth, but also give us what GIFs give us, which is transparency and animation. So PNGs, a lot of people see these as kind of the solution to all the web images. I'm going to argue that that's not really the case, but a lot of people go to this format first now for files because of those capabilities. However, I'm still going to say that if you are looking for a photographic image, you're still better off with a JPEG. But if you're looking for any form of transparency and animation, a PNG might be a better choice for you. So often this will be kind of like the default format for web for a lot of people. Now we come to the issue of how do we get the image on the screen. So we're going to do a little bit of this here, and really kind of what you need, folks, is an image to work with to put on the screen. Okay. Now, depending on what your topic is, right, like a picture of the dog playing with the laptop, it's probably not appropriate for the website called House of the Dragon, right? We probably need some dragons or some fire or some swords or something epic like that. So you know what? I don't have any pictures like that on my phone or in my Google Photos or anything. So I think I'm going to have to go out to the web and do a little hunting for an image. And so let's talk about that and how you find images and what images are okay. So these are big issues for web designers. Okay, so the one thing you got to be really careful of, and I'm saying this both to you as a creator and really kind of a user of the internet, is it is not, and I want you to hear me really carefully on this, it is not okay to steal other people's stuff, right? In principle, here we are doing it for school. If you want to like grab a screen grab of something and then like make it into a meme or whatever your deal is, okay, that's all in good fun. It's not really to make money, but if you are grabbing somebody else's professionally shot images and then using it to sell your product and make money, that is a major issue. And there are companies that have teams of lawyers that will come after you and hunt you down and make you pull that image down and charge you all sorts of money and give you all sorts of hassle. The other thing that can happen, and this has happened to me a few times, is where I took the time to create a bunch of products, and actually maybe not even bad to cut. So let me just give you an example. So like many years ago, I used to sell for Amazon, and I created hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs that I posted on here. And I'm just wondering if they're still using my images. Okay, it doesn't look like they're using my images anymore, thank goodness. But I used to sell this product, right? And they had a different can, and I went in and I took all the photographs, and then other people started just right-click, save as, taking my picture and using it. I'm like, I felt robbed, because I made that picture and you guys are all using it to sell the product, and I'm not making any money off of it. Now, granted, it wasn't my coffee that I made, but I took one off the shelf and took a picture of it and put it online. And then you have all these people that just come by and grab it. It's not cool, by the way, right? It's not cool to do. No, I did not send a team of lawyers after them. But if you're on Google and you're searching for something, so I'm just going to type House of the Dragon, right? And I'm going to get like a certain search results here, right? And and this is a general web search, right? So yeah, there's some images and videos and whatever come up here. Great, great, great. However, a lot of us, are aware of these tools here in Google, but I'm going to have you start digging a little deeper when you start using these tools. So like if you're looking for images for a website, you can go to the image area, right? And so here are images from the show. There's some pretty darn cool ones here. I'm not sure what I'm going to use quite yet. I'm perusing at the moment, right? I haven't really decided, but now I see this image. So I'm clicking on this one. This one might be kind of cool. And see, that's my tagline should be "Fire will rain." All right, that's an image right here. I want you to notice that as I hover over it, so I clicked on it in the search window, it brings up a side panel, and it also shows me a bunch of alternate versions of the same thing. Pretty cool all the way around. But I'm interested particularly to this. I want you to notice images may be subject to copyright. So if I start grabbing this, it's really easy to grab it, as you'll see in a second. And then I use it to sell my illegal House of the Dragon, swag or whatever, like t-shirts or whatever, whatever it is. You can bet HBO will probably eventually catch on to it, and I'll be getting letters to pull the images to. Sometimes it happens really, really quickly. Sometimes not at all. For educational purposes, we get a little bit of a pass because we're not trying to make money off of it. We're just trying to demonstrate techniques. You can usually grab copyrighted content, not fear being come after. But if you are doing it for commercial purposes, big problem, right? So with this particular image, I can actually copy it from here. In fact, they even have like, kind of easy ways to do this now. In fact, I could just right click and save image as, but I usually like to go to the site and find the spot where the actual image is and then grab it from here for a lot of different reasons, right? So here's an example where this is actually from like some sort of a magazine site, and they're using the official branding. Well, they're allowed to because they're doing a review, right? So there's an allowable use circumstance. But otherwise, this is generally not cool to steal, right? So right here, I'm right clicking on top of this image, and I want you to notice as you right click or command click on a Mac, by the way, you can choose save image as, and look at the file format. It's a WebP, and that's okay. We're going to use it as is. So this is becoming a modern format. This is really a PNG file, by the way. And where do I want to put this? Well, I want to put this where I'm putting my other stuff. In fact, I want to put it in the same folder as my web work. So I'm going to go find that folder in my OS here. And we're in Unit 4, House of the Dragon, and I can drop it in here directly. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just drop it right into that folder, and here it is. With the download tool in Chrome, I can go to that folder. So I'm doing a show in folder, and I'm looking at a few different things now as I grab this image, and this is pretty important. How big is this image? Okay, so when I say how big is it, I mean in two different ways. One would be the file size. How many kilobytes or megabytes? This is only 59 kilobytes. I would call that highly efficient. That's a very efficient image size. You notice as I hover over this, it also in Windows brings up a little box and it says dimensions 681 by 383. Very useful to web developers. Those exact dimensions are really critical, by the way. If you can't pull it up by doing that, you can also do a right click and do a properties for Windows. On a Mac, you would do get info, right? And then that will give you a lot more information about the file. And in Windows, we particularly look for the details tab, and then that will tell us, a bunch of different information. For example, 681 by 383. So it gives us the width and the height, horizontal resolution in dots per inch, vertical resolution, right? And this is kind of interesting. When we print stuff on paper, folks, do you guys know what the default resolution for printing on paper is? Depending on how good you want it to look, usually either 300 DPI or 600 DPI is pretty common for newspapers and magazines. Higher resolution, if you want to go to photographic quality, like 1200 DPI or above for photographs. So then why is screen resolution only 72 DPI? Well, they decided a number of years ago that 1 inch of screen space is 72 pixels. Somebody just kind of came up with it. And so most images that are designed for a screen, doesn't matter if it's a TV, a computer, a phone, a tablet, whatever, they're 72 DPI. They don't need to be any higher than that. Why? Because the screen handles the resolution otherwise. On the print format, what that means is how many dots do you get in 1 inch? So I want you to think about this. An inch is only about as big as like the tip of my thumb or whatever. And I have 72 pixels in there, that might look a little bit grainy. If I print it on paper, the only way I can get a smooth looking photograph on paper is to up that DPI. On a computer screen, all I have to do is zoom out, right? If I zoom way in on any image on a computer screen, I can see each individual dot. And I think this is really kind of interesting about how graphics work, but that's pretty normal. All right. So that information actually becomes kind of key. And what I might suggest to you, and you might do this and you might not, it's 681 by 383. You might want to memorize that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and now add this file. It's in my folder already, but I want to add it to my web page. All right, so I think that that would look really killer on my home page. So I'm going to go to my index page here. And you know what? I need to see where I'm going to put it. So where would that go? We could probably do some words, and then, or maybe even above the words would be a really good spot. You know, like it's like below the menu and above the words, killer looking dragon thing, right? Yeah, let's do that. All right, so I'm going to put it right before that first paragraph. So I got to find that spot in my code, right? And so that would be in the main section here, right above that first paragraph, right? So to add an image to a web page, let's take a look at the slide. And what the slide says is use the image tag, you do a source, you do an alt, and then you do a height and a width. Right? So I'm going to do all of those things, but we're going to do these one at a time. The most important part of the tag is the img. Right? It tells you it's an image. I'm not sure why they stuck with that. To me, it would have made more sense if, you know, with HTML5, if they finally upgraded it so it actually said image or picture or something like that. But img is what it's always been, and that's what it's going to stay. The other really key part is the src, which stands for source, right? And then you have to know the exact name of the file, right? So I want you to notice what Dreamweaver is doing for me. It's looking in my folder, it recognizes that I have the image. All I have to do is click on it and it drops it in and it puts it inside of double quotes. Right. That's easy peasy, right, on a product like this. If you are typing it in by hand, you want to make sure that every letter is exact. Uppercase, lowercase, dashes, spaces, file extensions, the whole bit. One handy tip I give to all my students is if you think that you might mistype it, it's better to do this. Right click, rename, Control A to select all, so highlight the whole thing and just copy it, right? And then when I bring it back to my code and I try to, you know, so let's say I'm like dropping it in here, I can paste it in and I know it's exact. Why? Because I copied it from the file name. How can it be wrong? Right? So it's a handy tip to do that. If your tool does what mine does, which is it finds it automatically for you and allows you just to click on it and add it. And notice what else Dreamweaver does is once it's loaded up, I can look at it too. That's pretty darn slick, I think. Right, so there's the image. I want you to notice I didn't add the alt tag and I didn't add the height and width. Okay, let's save this and I'm going to go into preview mode here. So I'm going to open it up in Chrome. Yeah, go ahead and save everything. And there it is. All right. First thing I'll say is that's kind of awesome. I'm not going to say it's awesome because it's not centered, right? Right? It's not centered because you kind of assumed it would center, but no, you have to tell it to center, by the way. But it is on the page and it looks okay, right? Okay. It also appears on the page in the exact resolution that the image is to begin with. And if you remember, it was about 631 across and whatever tall. And if my screen's 1980 across, 631, that's about right. So this is the native resolution of this image. Doesn't look too bad, maybe a little blurry, but you know, whatever. You can take your time and, you know, online, you can find the images that you want and you can go to Google and search, but there's other ways to grab them too. I'll show you that. Now, let's go back to the code for a second and talk about these other attributes they want us to add. The first one being alt. So the alt tag is, and this is, I want you to think about this, this is the text that will appear in place of the image if the image does not load. So under what circumstance might the image not load? Well, you misspelled the file name is one, right? So in your code, you wrote the wrong thing. Or you're on a phone, the connection is really slow, and that just hasn't loaded up yet. right? That happens too, right? And so the alt text is what it is words that'll appear in place of the image if the image does not load. So I'm going to say House of the Dragon, I don't know, logo thing, whatever. Right. And so those words will appear. I will intentionally break the file name here. So notice I intentionally broke the file name. And so here's your alt text appearing because the image did not load correctly. What a lot of people think about here with the alt tag is not only describing the image, but it's not even a bad idea to say a picture of the House of the Dragon logo thing or whatever, or just in case it doesn't load so people would know what it is. The other reason this is helpful as well is if somebody is using a screen reader, right? So they're blind and the page is being read to them, the alt text is what is read to them. And so it's not even a bad idea to say a picture of House of the Dragon logo thing. The HTML5 validator requires that an alt tag is present. And what a lot of designers do who are lazy, and I'll just put it out there, is they'll do the alt tag with nothing in it. So they'll just delete that stuff. It's just alt equals 2 double quotes, and they just do that. I don't consider that good practice. If you're doing the alt tag, you may as well put words in there. The other thing that they throw in the example, and I'm actually gonna trim this down, and I'm just gonna go House of the Dragon, HOTD, whatever. And I'm just doing that to save screen space, is they put in a width and a height. And this is one, for me, I find this a little difficult to teach because it is possible by using these, and I'm going to just show you really quickly, that I can adjust an image using the width and the height. Now, I want you to notice I am not putting in px like we do in CSS, right? I'm only using the numbers without the px, but it does imply pixels. I want you to take a look at what happened to this image. Oh, uh-oh. That's not what that image looks like. Well, I told it to be really narrow and really tall. It doesn't mean that it works for the image. So I can actually control the size and the shape of the image using those. And so you kind of run into this really dangerous situation here where you can really screw images up. So back to this thing about looking at the actual dimensions are 681 by 383. So let's go back to the code. So 681 by 383. Save that. And now it's back to normal. But I want you to think about this. It was normal before without the width and the height. So if you want it to just be the size that it is, width and height are not necessary. Here's why we actually use the width and the height. You should never really use width and height to adjust the size of your image. And I know different teachers will have different approaches on this, but I'm a believer of if you want the image to be that size on your screen, make it that size and then put it on the screen. Don't use a really super huge image and then make it smaller through the width and the height, which is what people do. And then what happens is it's just as efficient as loading a large image, which is not recommended. What the width and the height are actually doing is they're reserving the space on the screen for the image to appear before it loads up. So think back to slow bandwidth. If you're waiting for an image to load, have you ever been looking at a web page, particularly on your phone, and the words are on the page, and then all of a sudden you're reading the words, and all of a sudden they jump out of the way? What happened? Oh yeah, the image loaded, right? So they weren't using the width and the height tag. The image loaded and it moved your words. If you use the width and the height tag, your stuff won't jump around. So that's kind of the reason why to use it. Another thing that I kind of like to point out here, and this is, kind of gets a little deep, but I look at, for example, And I'm going to like my Google Photos here. I'm trying to find something that's appropriate to show. All right, how about like a beautiful landscape like this? Okay, so here's some trees in the woods, and what's that?
The North Woods.
The North Woods, yes. This is up near the Wisconsin Dells area. We were visiting with some friends, and I just thought it was kind of a cool scene, so I snapped a picture. And that's often where my Zoom backgrounds come from. This is straight off of my phone. My phone syncs to my Google account, and it just uploads, and it's there, right? And then I can do whatever. But if I download this photograph, and this is coming off of Google Photos, so it's already downsized a little bit. I want you to take a look here at the file size of my image. Notice what the file size is? 2,402 kilobytes, which is about 2 megabytes in size. That's considered for the web a really, really large image. Now, if I open this up on my operating system, right? Here it is. It opened up in my photo viewer, and like, great, it fills the whole screen. Perfect. No, not so perfect. I want you to take a look up in the corner here. This is actually only at 43%. The actual image, if I change this, and actually we want to go all the way up to 100, there's 100%. What you'll notice is the image is way bigger than the screen. Way bigger than the screen. This is at 100% resolution. So this is the big conundrum for web developers. When a photo comes in from a camera, and this is even a high res photo, folks, and you can tell it looks really grainy when you kind of zoom in. When you get a high res photo, it's potential that it's thousands of pixels across by thousands of pixels tall. And if my screen's not nearly that big, it would be foolish for me to show this in full resolution. In fact, what makes a whole lot more sense is resizing the image and saving it in a smaller format for placement on a web page, rather than using the whole thing on the web page. Now I could take this image, so I'm going to just do this for demonstration sake, and put it in my House of the Dragon folder. I'm just going to paste in the photograph. I thought I was pasting, so let's copy and paste. All right, why is it not copying? I'll do it the manual way with like right clicks. There it is, okay. So I'm also, that's a really cryptic file name, so I'm not going to remember that. So I'm going to rename it, highlight it all, and copy it so I can paste the right name into my code. And then I'm going to come back here to my code, and right below the House of Dragon thing, I'm going to do another image tag. I'm going to do my src equals, I'm going to paste in the name. Not worried about the size or the alt tag. There it is. I'm saving it. And then let's go back to the browser and look wherever the browser is. So here is the browser, and there's my image in full size without being reduced. First of all, look how grainy that looks because we're zoomed in. It's really, really grainy. And then look how wide my web page has become. Notice I scroll, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, right? It's ridiculous. So you do not want to then come in here and just go like this and say with, 500, and guess, and I'm totally guessing at the numbers. I'm not even doing the math on it. The correct way to do it is, if you do resize it, is at least do the math and make it proportional. And I don't know, I'm just guessing at numbers and saving it. And now here it is on the page, and that does look a little better, but I'm not sure that 500 by 300 is accurate for dimensions. And you know what? I'm still loading an image that's, I want you to think about this. This one is 59 kilobytes. This one is 2,400 and something kilobytes. So this one is going to require a lot of data being moved to load up. This one is not. So this is one of the conundrums that we face. So then what do you do with the image? Well, then you start to resize the image. Now, I don't know if this Windows 11 tool, so I'm like kind of new to Windows 11, real frankly. I don't know if this has a resize in it. Oh, it does. All right. excellent. So the photo viewer has a resize in it. On the Mac OS, you have a preview tool that does the same kind of thing. And so notice it has some presets for different sizes. Best for viewing is, a little bit smaller. And they have some presets. Okay, best for profile pictures and thumbnails. Okay, you know what, that's okay. Or I can do custom dimensions. And this is really the part I really want you guys to play with. So you can see my original resolution is 4,000 pixels. No wonder it's so big. My screen's only 1900, right? Across. So 4,000 by 2268. All right, whatever. I can come in here, and if I have a target size of maybe something more reasonable, like let's say 500 pixels. Notice with this checkbox checked, it does the math automatically and adjusts the second value for me. Or if I want to skew it, I can uncheck that box and let it do whatever. It also helps me adjust the quality. So a JPEG or a PNG usually has this little slider for quality, which, by the way, is controlling the amount of compression. So more to the right, more clear the picture, more to the left, the less clear it is. And there's kind of trade-offs. What I do like about this new Resize tool, right? This is where we started at 2.3 megabytes, according to this. Let's go save a resized copy. And then, of course, wants us to put it somewhere else. I'm going to go put it back in the same folder. So I'm finding the same exact folder. And then I'm going to, call it, up north, whatever, right? It's going to go in the Unit 4 folder, though. House of the Dragon. Notice it also offers me file formats, suggesting JPEG because it's a photograph, so that I am going to stick with JPEG. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. Let's go back now to the file folder and take a look at the file. All right, so I'm going to refresh here. 45 kilobytes is a lot more efficient than 2,400 kilobytes, right? The dimensions, 500 by 281. Let's go back to the code now. And I mean, you can leave this original one in place, but I'm gonna actually change this. And let's get rid of this. In fact, we'll get rid of the width and the height. We'll get rid of all this stuff inside here and just retype it. So we'll do src equals, we'll browse, we'll find it. Oop, not Java Jam, House of the Dragon. And we want the up north there, hey. There it is, right? Let's save this. Let's go back to the browser and take a look. And there's the image. And it's a lot more efficient. This isn't really a good image example because the picture's not a great one to start with. But we just saved a whole almost 2 megabytes of download, if you think about that. And that stuff adds up. So like another reason you want to make your downloads or your images efficient is if you have like all these huge images that have been forced downsized onto your page, you're burning somebody's bandwidth on their phone, right? On their data plan, right? So think about that. The other advantage is a small image, when it's put up on a web server, the smaller the image, the faster the load time, right? And so have you ever gone to a web page and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for those images to load to the point where they're like coming in like one line of the image at a time, right? Really, really frustrating, for the user. Users appreciate it when the images just pop right on the screen and look good, right? And it is possible with, if you know kind of what you're doing, to achieve both of those goals at the same time. All right, folks, what we're going to do here is we are going to take a break right now and we'll come back. So let's do a 5-minute break. All right, we are back from break and I'm going to switch back over to our slideshow here. All right, so kind of pick up on some of these topics. So the alt attribute, we talked about that. At the very least, I'm going to suggest that you have to put it in. If you don't put the alt thing in, even like blank like this, you will get errors from the validator and from most good coding tools. The truth is it doesn't really cause a problem, but if you do want your site to be accessible, you really have to include it. And it doesn't take much to actually add a few words about a link. All right, so we learned how to use anchor tags to create links with words, but wouldn't it be cool if we could use it to make images linkable too? In fact, you can, and you can use very much the same technique. So I'm going to take my little House of the Dragon image and I'm going to make it link to the HBO website. And I think I had one of those links here. So I'm going back over to my About page here, and I'm going to grab the link from here, right here. So notice the anchor tag. I'm just going to grab the first part of it, by the way. And I'm going to go back to my home page and I'm going to add that first part in front of the image tag, right? And then after the image tag, I'm going to close my anchor tag like this, right? So what you have basically is an anchor tag that wraps around the image. And when I do that, the whole image becomes linkable. So let's go back to the browser, make sure we do a refresh here. And I want you to notice as I hover over the image now, how my pointer changes from an arrow to a finger. And then you notice down here in the corner that it previews the link for me, right? And maybe this is kind of a silly time to bring this up, but when an image is linkable like this, and I want you to think about this, one of the biggest ways that like scammers try to get people to like give out passwords or usernames or whatever is by getting you to click on stuff that looks real, it takes you somewhere else. So like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to the House of the Dragon webpage, I'll click on this image, but you should hover for a second and look at that link in the bottom corner. Where is that actually taking me? Is it, if it was taking me to joe's website.com versus HBO Max, one's real and one's not, and you should be able to kind of determine that pretty quickly. But people get really clever with that too. They'll even go as far as like having URLs that look like Google or Yahoo, like you look at them and it looks like it's real, but it's totally not. Right, so that makes the image linkable. Let's test it. We'll click, and there we are, right there. Right, and you can see like the proper, like really cool looking branding here, right? So there's definitely a lot of really cool images to use for this as a page. All right, so that's an example of linking an image. Another thing that happens, and I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to say this is really no longer an issue in my mind, but in the old days when we would use Internet Explorer, for whatever reason, right, it would sometimes put a border around the image. And so the thinking was this. So how do you, like in the old days, how would you know if an image is a link or an image is not a link? And so somebody's like, I know, let's put a blue border around the image and then people will know it's a link, right? So if you've ever seen an image with a blue border on it, it's probably an Internet Explorer and it's probably an old web page. So there's a CSS trick you can use to kind of eliminate that. Some people use this, some people don't. I've discovered in the last 10 years, I kind of don't need to really use it anymore. Internet Explorer is really kind of not an issue anymore. So you would put in this thing and it says border style none. And if you are getting blue lines around your browser, that's one way to get rid of them. Right. Another kind of clever thing to do, and this is kind of a technique I always use for websites, think of it as kind of like a primitive gallery of sorts, right? Is where you have a really small version of an image and then you have a really big version of an image. And it's not like you want to keep the big image away from the person. So like maybe you're a photographer. So think about this. So maybe you're a photographer and this is an image that you took, and then you want people to be able to download the high-res version, but you don't want to put that on the main homepage because then it takes forever to load, and it only loads up if they click on it. So this is an example of that. And really all they're doing here, folks, is they're creating the image link with the small one. That's what's linkable, is the small image. And then when you click on it, it takes you to the big image. All right, so I'll just show you an example of this really quick. So I am going to go back here and maybe I can find some sort of other kind of cool image. Oh, this is a nice one. So this one I took by the South Shore Marina in Milwaukee. So it's always kind of cool to use your own photographs, by the way, you know. So a lot of times when, you know, a lot of times web people end up buying really nice digital cameras or really nice iPhones or whatever, and learning how to take pictures, you know, because there's kind of that's kind of a whole thing too. So here's that image I just downloaded. This is the full size one. I'm going to go ahead and make, here, let's just do the open. So this opens up with the preview tool, and we already found the resize. So let's go ahead and do a resize, and I'm going to do custom. I want to make it really small. Maybe like a 100 pixels is good. So we're going to save a resized copy. It's going to ask me where. Okay, I'll go ahead and put that in the other folder here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a tag to this, and I want you to see this. I just put SM at the end for small. That's my convention. I think what the author does is TN for thumbnail. You know, some people will go as far as just going thumb for the small version of an image. So I'm going to go ahead and save that in the folder. And then I'm also going to go back to my downloads here and grab the original image, copy it, and then let's go to the House of the Dragon. We'll just paste it into the folder. And that's the large version. And they might even go as far as like naming it large and small. You know, I'm going to say that I think that's really handy to do. Not everybody agrees with that, you know, because it's extra work. But that way, whenever you look at the file folder, you know, which is the full resolution. In fact, you might say full res, something like that. Okay, so I have full res and thumb of the same image. Full res, 4,000 pixels across. Thumbnail, 100 pixels across. Look at the difference in file size, you guys. You know, over a meg, 3 kilobytes. Right, now let's see how that plays out on the page. All right, so I'm going to come back over here, and you know what? Let's put this image down here. All right, so I'm going to create a new image tag, the source, and what I'm going to link up here is the low res version. So thumb, I called it. I'll say okay. It's good to put in an alt. I'll leave it blank. I'm not going to worry about height and width. All right, so there's the image. Let's just save this and take a look at how it loaded up. So let's go back to the browser. Where is my House of the Dragon page? Probably have to go back, right? There we go. So there's mine, and there's my thumbnail. But really small, right? Not linkable. So I'm going to wrap the image with an anchor tag. So here comes the anchor tag. So href. And what am I linking to? Well, I'm going to link to the full size version of the image. So you can do that. So I'm going to just choose full res, say okay, close my link. Then I want to put the closing link after the image. So in other words, the anchor tag surrounds the image. Okay, real helpful tip, and this is kind of not in the book. There's nothing that says that you only have to wrap text in an image. You could actually wrap an entire structure. So you could have like a heading, a paragraph, and an image all inside the same link, by the way. That does work. Right, so we're going to save this. So the image shown on the page is the thumbnail, but it links to the full res picture. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Back to the browser, take a look, and we'll see that it is now linkable. And when I click, now it doesn't open up a page. It is huge. Yes, it is huge and unusable really at this resolution, right? But, and you can tell this is a much nicer photograph. This is done with my phone, right? And I don't even have a very good phone. But here it is full res. And so if I wanted to download a full res copy, I could then right click, save it image as, and I have the whole thing. This does not take us to a separate page, by the way. This just loads up the image in the browser. So we're not linking to a page. We're just linking to an image. And if you look at the link bar at the bottom, it just shows you you're going to an image. But it's a really simple way to have low res and high res images on a website. And I was always a big fan of using that approach, because then when a big image came up, I didn't really have to make another page because it was all about the image, right? One of the things that they talk about here, and we've kind of already been doing this, is finding like a good size for the image, like how big is it and what file size is good. And notice what it says at the bottom. Photographs taken with digital cameras are not usually optimized for the web. In fact, most of our modern digital cameras, like if you have like a good digital SLR or even like a good point and shoot camera, right? That's like not on your phone, by the way. Most people just use their phone now, right? But if you have a decent digital camera, those images are generally too big for the web, and you do have to downsize them quite a bit. And that's normal, right? So even if you're doing it with your phone, you're going to be downsizing those images. So how do you do that? Well, here's kind of the general rule of thumb. Most of our modern operating systems, Mac OS, Windows, and you guys see I'm using Windows 11. They have photograph preview tools. So like when you see a photograph, you double click it and it opens up in the operating system tool. And those tools often have a way to resize the image. But if you are looking for specific software, like on Windows, we have what we call Paint, right? And there's two different versions. There's the old version, that's the one that you see highlighted right now. And then there's Paint 3D, both of which have resize tools built in. Paint 3Ds are a little better. I am impressed though with the photo viewer in Windows 11 that it has a resize tool built right into it. I'm not sure if the Windows 10 one does. My thought is no, but maybe I'm wrong. And if it does, I apologize for leading you astray. I guess you have to find out. I don't have Windows 10 here to demonstrate, right? On the Mac, they have a preview tool that does the same thing, and that's got resize built into it. It has for a long time.
Messing with that. Yeah, you kind of have to go into options, get info, and like you said, go into preview.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of work.
It is. And you know what, Roman, that's really kind of a good point, because whenever you're doing this stuff, it is work, right? You know, I always, tell stories to my students about like, I would do like these big e-commerce projects, and I would undertake the photography part of it too. And so sometimes I would spend weeks shooting photographs, and then I would spend weeks editing the photographs. And that was all I did, and then you learn really good ways to do it and more efficient ways to do it. And you know what, people, there's free tools out there that you can use, by the way, where you don't even have to install software. Now, these days, I'm going to say if you're just resizing an image, the stuff built into Windows and the stuff built into a Mac will work just fine, right? There's not a lot of, you saw how easy it was that I pulled it up and changed the dimensions pretty quickly. Not hard to do. When you need to do higher level editing though, like you need to adjust the brightness and the contrast and sharpness, and maybe you want to crop part of it or whatever, right? Then you're usually looking at higher end tools. And probably the industry standard is a tool called Photoshop, right? Okay, so yes, I'm a subscriber, so I'm going to go ahead and bring Photoshop up on the screen. Now, I'm going to argue that as a web person, it's probably not a bad idea to learn this product, because when you do walk into the professional design houses, this is the go-to product. And not that you can't kind of figure it out quickly, but it is a very complex product. And so when you're working with images, and let's say you want to adjust them, this gives you the most powerful set of tools to work with. And you see I'm opening up, at least I thought I opened it up. There it is. Okay, it just takes a moment. The photograph that I took, right? And I can do the resizing in here too. In fact, I'm going to say that the resizing is probably more complicated in a product like this than it would be like in the tool that I use in Windows, because I have to go to the menu here, and I forget, is it, yeah, I think it's the image menu, and we go to canvas size is what you adjust, or image size. And what, these two are kind of interrelated, but if I'm changing the size of the image, it does have tools built in, maybe a little bit more granular control, and they do show you what it looks like as you're adjusting it. I can adjust it to different parameters or whatever. But if I do kind of like the same thing I was doing, so let's say I go 300 pixels, it can auto resample it to the right size. I can change the resolution. And here's what you don't have in some of those other tools is how it's doing the resizing. So you can apply different mathematical formulas to get different results and sharpness levels, by the way. So this is, I think, pretty handy, frankly, that you have this kind of a tool available. Now, what Photoshop brings to the table that the others don't, is basically all the different image adjustments and, like some of the real basics like level. So I just want to show you just by some of the tools here, like some of the stuff that I can do to the image, that I wouldn't be able to do in a kind of, so I can emphasize different aspects of the photograph that you otherwise might not even notice otherwise. And I mean, that's a much different photograph than this, right? Not that the first one was bad, but that's kind of cool, it emphasizes the sky, so if you're really about tweaking the stuff, this is a tool to use. Because the level of control is that much more. I can also augment the photograph, so I can crop it, I can colorize it, I can draw on it, I can add other things, I can put words into it. Oh my God, what can you do in Photoshop? Just about anything, really, is kind of the answer. Right, I'm not going to save this. There's another Adobe product that's really similar, and I'm of course I'm editing my slide here. Oops, Control Z. I meant to be here. And if you have the suite, it's a product called Lightroom, which is kind of like photo pre-processing. It doesn't give you all the editing controls of Photoshop, but it does allow you to do image adjustments. So a lot of photographers really dig this product. My son, who's an avid amateur photographer, uses this on all of his photographs. And this, he takes a photograph that kind of looks like, does a couple of tweaks to it, and it looks like, holy cow, is that amazing, right? And it's got different kinds of tools in Photoshop, but similar. All right, so those are products that are awesome, but not free, right? Okay, so what do you do if you're on a budget? Well, one of the big ones is this product called Gimp, and Gimp is a free, we call it kind of like the poor man's Photoshop, really. But Gimp is a multi-platform tool that is free and open source and does all basically the same things that Photoshop does with no cost attached to it. And I believe it's completely multi-platform. Don't quote me on that, but I know it works on Windows just fine, and I believe it works on Linux just fine too. And in fact, we just click this. Okay, so there's Windows, whatever, different languages. I'm not saying, it might just be auto doing it for Windows. Oh, no, there is a Mac OS version and a Linux version. Okay, so it works on all platforms. Not one I usually load up on my systems anymore, but if I wanted to do some higher end work and I didn't want to shell out the money for Photoshop, that's free, Now I know a lot of people who are into doing art and artwork, and I think of my daughter, for example, where there's a bunch of new school illustration and drawing and photo manipulation tools out there, tons of them. Some are only on Mac, some only on Windows, some on tablets, some on phones. So feel free to explore. There's no real right or wrong answer to it. Another thing you should be aware of, and this is one that I usually push because I like this product a lot, is this product called Pixlr, which is a free in-browser editor, and they have a few different versions here. And usually I go with the middle one. And I just want you to notice this opens up in your browser, right? There's nothing to install. You can do a lot of the same kind of adjustments and cropping and resizing and all that, and do some more Photoshop kind of style things inside the product, inside your browser, and then be able to download it to your machine. And it is free, right? There's premium versions that give you more features, but take that for whatever it's worth. I also kind of want to point out, that aside from the stuff built into your operating system, as part of the Google ecosystem, if you go to your drive and you create a new file, one of your options is to create a Google Drive. So they have a graphic editor built into the Google environment as well. Now, granted, this is a lot more primitive, right? But you can drop photos in here and do manipulations and whatever. If you're using the Google Photo tool, this has a bunch of built-in adjustments that you can do, for example, or cropping, or rotating or whatever. And I really don't want to change my photograph, by the way. So I want to just exit out of there without changing the photograph, because that's kind of a nice photograph. So just keep all those in mind. Like when you're adjusting images, for the most part, in a real, very practical sense, what web designers most often do with images is they give them to them and they resize them. That's most often what they do. There are those circumstances, though, where when you're putting something on a screen, like, for example, I was here when I took this photograph, and what I noticed is the sky was a lot more vibrant when I was there in person. The camera didn't really capture it correctly. And if I'm going to make adjustments, it's to kind of restore what my eye was seeing. I also see that a lot of times when I'm taking pictures of things to put them online, it's usually best to brighten them up for a screen, is also another thing I discovered. These are things that you kind of learn as you go, and I can give you lots of practical tips for doing that. They make this point too about okay, what image names or names do you use for image files? And if you're taking it right off your camera, you saw what happened with mine. It's got the date and the time stamped into it, which is great, but it doesn't tell me it's a picture of the lakefront, right? And so name things in ways that make sense to you. The author suggests all lowercase letters. Why? Because that's their convention, right? And I tend to do the same thing with everything I name. I tend to use lowercase because that way I don't have to guess at how it's named. But naming is appropriate. They say keep it short but descriptive, and so they're saying this is too short, right? This is probably too long, and this might be about right. I will say that the convention these days in computing is to be more verbose with how you name things rather than not, right? Another thing you run into really quickly when you start working with images, as I did already, it didn't take very long either, is all of a sudden, I barely have any images on the site, and I got a folder full of images. And you know what, if I have hundreds of photographs, now I'm looking for my web pages and they're hard to find. So what they suggest is that you actually create a new folder inside your project and maybe call it images or image or pictures or whatever suits you, right? And images to me make sense. Notice all lowercase. And then I'm going to take all my images on the site. These are all images, and I'm going to pull them into that folder. Now, what will happen on the web page, of course, if I go look at my web page now, wherever that is, here, these probably will break, right? Because none of the pictures are there. And so I need to go back to my code. If I put them in an image folder, I have to add something to my code, and that is wherever that image is located, in front of the file name, I'll have to add the name of the folder. So in this case, images, right? For that one, images for this one. Yeah, images, and then a slash. Now I want you to notice, unlike Windows, slashes for file names in code are always / because that's how everybody except for Windows does it. Windows does the backslash, by the way. So never want to be a backslash, always a /. But what this does is it points the spot of the file relative to the HTML file that is calling it. So from the HTML files, the two that we have, to get to an image, first I have to go to the image folder, open it, and then find the image. So that's why we adjust our code that way. So if I did this correct and save it and go back to the browser and refresh, I didn't even need to refresh. Now the images are there again, all working, including the supersized thumbnail thing. All right, moving on, folks. All right, a couple of other interesting elements. These I'm not going to demonstrate all of these. I'm just going to put some of these on the screen and talk about them really quick, and you can kind of experiment with them on your own. So I hope that you do that. These are some new ones that they added for HTML5 called figure and fig caption. So they kind of realized, as you would do like web pages, so common to put a picture on the page and then put some words underneath it to describe it, right? Like in a magazine. And right here you see that where they have the lighthouse and right underneath there's a caption. So here's the code they use to create that. They create this figure, and the figure becomes a container for both the image and its caption. So they're kind of carried together. So you set up the figure tag, think of that as your container, or like a div or something like that. Then you put in your image, and then the caption goes underneath. And the caption, like if you were able to take this image and zoom in, but I'm just going to zoom in, the caption is usually italicized by default, right? You can override that with CSS if you wish. But what is nice about that is the figure, the image, and the caption are bundled together, right? So that's kind of useful. Some other interesting and weird HTML elements, and this is one, I mean, you do see this on web pages, but usually it's kind of dynamically generated by JavaScript or something, is this thing called a meter tag. The meter tag is kind of interesting in that it sets up some parameters. So it really creates this thing here, and notice what it is: monthly browser report, total visits, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari, Opera, whatever. And each one of these has a different progress. And they show here the total of all the visits is 14,417. And so they set up a min and a max here. It goes from 0 to that maximum. And then what is the actual value that's displaying in green? And so they just break it up into 3 parameters, folks. So it's basically value, the green amount, 0, the starting position, max is the ending position, and then whatever your value is, we'll take it that far up. So that's the meter element. I could demonstrate that one. In fact, hey, you know, if you want to demonstrate this one, you can come into the PowerPoint and just copy the code and paste it in. Not hard to do. Right? Another one that's kind of similar is the progress thing. Once again, you know, typically when I see this on web pages, it's usually dynamically generated by JavaScript code. So I take that for whatever it's worth. Here's one that's really similar to meter. And they basically, it's assumed that 0 is the starting point. You just set a max and you put in a value, very typical. But usually it's only 1 and not multiples. All right, let's move on to stuff that we're maybe a little bit more interested in. And that's CSS background stuff. So this, I think this is particularly cool. So you can add in CSS a background image. So now why this is important. A lot of times when we're doing objects in HTML, we're putting words on the page, right? And then you're like, wouldn't it be really cool if, right? I could have this cool background behind those words. And you're like, well, wait a second, that background is an image, but I already have words in that spot. So how do I put an image and words in the same spot without taking the image into Photoshop and adding words on top of it, right? So this is really kind of what we're trying to accomplish here. A couple of really clever, interesting usages of this, and I want you to kind of notice this as we do this, is this particular example here, and I'm going to kind of zoom in on it a little bit, shows this background image. And I want you to notice somebody went in and they created an image that's really short, but really super wide. And that image has got a blue border on one side and the rest of it is yellow. And then they put it on the web page and it comes out like this and it fills the whole page. And what happens, and this is kind of the trick of background images, is they automatically repeat horizontally and vertically. So when I create this super wide image that's a little blue on the left and yellow on the right, and I put it on the page and it fits all the way across, it will repeat down, and that thin little image will create a web page that just keeps going down like that with the background. And you know what? You do see websites like that, right? So that's one approach. Here's another example where this background image, the image is actually just this little square, which maybe accounts for about this much of the screen here. And I'm speculating, or maybe about this much of the screen. When I put it in as a background, it will repeat both horizontally and vertically. And even though the square might only be this big, it fills up the whole screen with a background. All right, so it automatically, so when you put a background image in, this is important to know, it automatically fills the screen horizontally and vertically. And that's kind of like a hard one to kind of figure out here. So you can actually control it. So if you don't want it to repeat both horizontally and vertically, here they have a little chart that shows you like what happens if I have an image like this and I only repeat in one direction. So this is where we kind of get into a little bit of like, I got to draw on the screen to demonstrate a couple things here. So the first thing that we do is whenever we're looking at a computer screen, and I should have probably used the rectangle tool on this, but let's say this is our computer screen, this red box, right? Not perfect, but close, right? This top corner up here is what we call the 0, 0 spot. That's where the origin point is on the screen. So this is 0, 0. And unlike the Cartesian coordinate system that you learn in math, that's like this, right? It's a cross and 0, 0's in the middle, right? And if you go up this way, Y gets bigger. You go right this way, X gets bigger. But if you go left this way, X gets smaller, right? And if you go down, it's all negative, right? That's a Cartesian coordinate system. But on the screen, the 0, 0 point's in the top left corner right here. And as I go this way, X gets bigger. As I go this way, Y gets bigger, right? Okay, so why that's important is if I'm repeating something in the Y direction, I'm repeating it down. If I repeat in the X direction, it goes that way. So it's basically showing you that you can take a background, and if you want, you can control how it repeats. If I don't say repeat Y or repeat X, it will just, that little flower, for example, would fill the whole screen in all directions. If I say no repeat, it only happens once. So that can be a technique too, to get like a little symbol in the corner and not have it repeat. All right, so let's try this. This is kind of a weird kind of thing to do. And so, you know, if we're gonna do a background, well, let's start out by doing something kind of bizarre. So I need something to work with image-wise. And so I'm gonna go out to Google and find something. Basically, I don't want to be creating it right now, but you know what? Here's an alternative. This might be a good alternative. Here is this like dragon thing, right? This dragon like circle logo or whatever. What if? All right, so here you go. What if I just take that logo and instead of going out to the web, I use my snipping tool and create a screen grab of just the dragon circle thing, right? There it is. Well, there it was. Where is my snipping tool? Right here. Okay, there it is. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this, right? Actually, you know what? Let's do it. Yeah, let's just save it as is. Right. Save. I'm going to put it in that folder that I'm working on, in the images folder, and I'm going to call it HOD round logo, right? Good enough. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, a couple things I have to do to my page first, and I want to have you think about this, is right now I'm kind of working on the screen and I have stuff in a container, so it's kind of narrowed in a little bit. But what's happening, at least to my eyes, is that I'm going to try to put a background in these open areas here on the side, but then the content area in the middle should probably be cleaned up a little bit too. So we're going to do a couple different maneuvers here to make this look a little better. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my index page, my home page, and I'm going to apply some styles to the container to put it basically like more in a box is really kind of what my goal is here. So that's my target area for styling right now. So I'm going to go to the style sheet for the container, and I already have the left, right, auto, and the width, and that's 80%. I'm going to actually reduce the width down to 70, so we have a little bit more side space to work with. And then I'm going to do some of the tricks that we learned today. So I'm going to put a border around my container, and let's go 3 pixels, solid, purple, probably look horrible, but whatever. Okay, so there's my border. And because I have content, I can actually look at this inside of here. So look what it did, right? That's not really looking very good because it's touching the content. So you see that effect. It may or may not be what you want. I'm going to purport that maybe okay by where the images are, but whenever there's words, the words shouldn't touch the edge of the screen. So I'm also going to add to this padding all the way around. In fact, I might get more persnickety about this. I might actually say, I want padding, maybe the top and bottom, I don't want any padding. But the left and the right, I might want like 50 pixels of padding. Okay, so you see what that did as I did that, right? Everything moved away from the edges. All right, maybe it doesn't look that great. Maybe the top should have 50 pixels too. I don't know, highly subjective. These are the kind of things that you spend hours playing with until you get it just right, right? So that creativity is yours. I'm also, you know what? I'm gonna also do a background color. And I want to show you that you can kind of use background color and images at the same time. So background color for that main box, it might be better with something a little less beige, perhaps, right? But also not too dark. Maybe gray would be okay. Let's do gray. Remember, this is for example. I'm not claiming it looks good, right? But now what we're seeing is everything is kind of containerized, and you can see that content real closely. All right, so now that we have everything containerized, now I'm going to add that image. And so the way to do that is you say background dash image. And if you look at the syntax from the slide, so this is kind of interesting, somewhere here, right here. Go back a couple of slides. They just say URL, kind of interesting. I don't know why they don't use source, for example. And then in parentheses, background.gif. Now there's some changes to the HTML5 standard, which I'm going to demonstrate right now. So you do want to say URL, and then inside there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to browse to it, and HOD round logo, right? That was the thing that I chose. And I want you to notice how I really screwed this up. Where did I put the background image? I didn't put it on the page. I put it inside my container, and I want you to notice how it repeats horizontally and vertically. And because it's so dark, all my black text is completely unreadable. It's there, right? My text is there, but it's totally unreadable. So not really a good place for this. However, I could pick this up, cut it, and I could move it to the body as a background image. And now I get this. So I'm going to go ahead and save here, and let's go to the browser and take a look at the result, folks. Okay. This is not the prettiest example, but what is happening with that background, and I'm going to zoom way out so you can see it, is it does repeat horizontally and vertically. All right, may or may not be what you want, all right? But it is kind of cool. right? So I could do some kind of clever things. So for example, okay, let's go back to full resolution here. Maybe, just maybe, on the body section, I could make that background color just black, right? And then with this image, I could just say repeat Y. And let's save that and go back to the browser. Oh, and it didn't even work. Did I do my repeat Y incorrectly? There's a very good chance of it. No, I did it correctly. That's. Oh, I see. Background repeat is a separate command. So I have to actually say that separately, right? So I'm using the singular command. So I would do this. Background dash repeat. I'd say repeat Y. All right, so take a look at the output of this now in the browser. If I can get that back on the screen, and how that logo just repeats on the right. And if I repeat X, it'll go across. Or if I want, I mean, what I could do is I could just say no repeat, right? And so here, just change that to no dash repeat. And then it appears only once. Once again, may or may not be what you want, but I could, you know, like if the page layout was right, kind of having something like that might look kind of cool. I don't know, you know. It's really kind of all in the vision of what you're seeing, right? But that's the example of what happens. And then you can also use other commands to actually position it in certain spots, but that's generally kind of the approach with that. I don't think that this is a really good background for this, real frankly. All right, let's try to find a background that might be kind of cool for House of the Dragon. So I'm going to just go out to Google here, House of the Dragon. We'll search that. We'll go to images. And now I'm trying to look for something that would be really, really epically cool, right? And I'm not really quite sure what that is quite yet, but now I'm going to keep in mind that whatever image I pick, right, I'm only going to be seeing the sides of it, not the center of it most of the time. And so what you can do is maybe I could get this like cool dragon, or maybe that's not really a good one. Oh gosh. And so maybe what I really need to do, House of the Dragon, and just type background. So let's see if we find something here that would be, I don't know, anybody see one that they really like? Yeah, a lot of, you know, frankly, a lot of them are pretty cool, but none of them are really striking a note with me right now as being a good image. Now, so here's something kind of interesting. How about a texture? All right, I'll buy that. Save image as. I can go right into my images folder. That's a really long name, so I'm going to rename it straight away. And scales background sounds pretty good to me, so let's save that. And let's just come in here and see if we can just change the URL. And this is where the tool is pretty helpful. So let's just browse. It's not seeing that image. And you notice what it did here now, and this is, I think, the big difference between the book and the practical sense of doing HTML5. The book does not have the double quotes. You guys notice that? But Dreamweaver is pushing it, so I'm thinking it's probably better to include it. I'm going to remove the repeat on this. And now, hey, that's kind of cool. Some dragon scales in the back of the site. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but hey, you know what? It's not too bad, right? So a very interesting kind of approach to this. Another couple little things that you might want to try. So these are things that you'll play with as you kind of go. Is you start to notice as you start to do this kind of design work in the browser is really what it is. And you see the outcome of it and you're like, well, that looks cool. Now I want to do this, right? And so like one thing I see is like, well, maybe the top should be moved down a little bit. So I might come up here to the body, and how would I adjust that down from the top? Well, I could put a margin at the top, and let's say we do 30 pixels. So move it down just a little bit. That purple border is horrible. So let's just make it black. Much better already. Notice how just that change made it look cool, right? And in fact, maybe it would really cool to have a really big thick border, like 15 pixels. You know, maybe. So take that for whatever it's worth. Another really kind of fun thing is, what if this background color in the main section, what if I could see through it? So we have this thing, and we will learn this technique later in the book, by the way, but I sometimes don't mind adding some of this stuff. But I'm thinking about the opacity of the whole container maybe being, I don't know, 75, or actually the way they do this is 0.75. And you notice what just happened. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but I just made the whole container and its background colors transparent. Everything in here is transparent. You can see through, and you can see the dragon scales if that's what it supposedly is. I mean, so I'm just showing you like how like these little tweaks really quickly kind of ramp up the whole site. And so you can do like a bunch of different little adjustments like this, and you got things going pretty far and fast. One thing I think it's important to note also is with these background images, that background is one of these things where you can combine all the statements like padding. So you would eliminate the dash image, dash repeat, dash color, and you would just say background and then just include the color, the URL, and the repeat thing all in the same statement. So that's entirely possible. There are also ways, and this is kind of interesting, to have multiple background images. And I do see people kind of doing this, where they declare one background image, which is the gradient. It's like this green. And then they use this other approach where this other little flower down here is also a background image. But notice they use the singular background command. They put in the URL for the image. They do not repeat it. And then they put a command in that says bottom right. And there it is in the bottom right. So that's entirely doable as well. Right. I'm going to move forward now to kind of like the closing part of the chapter, and we're going to do some of this stuff here today, and then we're going to wrap up. We should be able to get to the material today, but we might not be able to code through all of this stuff. Some of it is really more informational than anything else. All right, so this is what we're looking at in the last section of the PowerPoint. So the first one is this thing called an image map. And this is really kind of an interesting, I almost call it like a historical artifact, because it's possible. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to a website. Have you ever gone to a website where it's like, all right, you click on a thing. All right, what state do you live in? And then they have a picture of the United States, and you can just click on Wisconsin. Right? Have you ever seen that? That's done by a technique called an image map. And what an image map is where you take a portion of an image, declare the coordinates, so the XY positions, and then whatever falls inside those coordinates, you can make clickable and then linkable to a specific thing. Now, in this case, okay, this isn't a great example. I really like the United States map example a lot because that's more practical. But in the old days, before we had a lot of CSS control, we often would use image maps. We would make an image of our menu, and then we would make it an image map, and you could click on the image to go to the page you wanted to go to. Or whatever, you know, that was kind of a thing that we did. This is more of a legacy thing. You can still use it, and you can get really creative, and you can create really funky little shapes and all that. But I would call this I'm not going to call it a dead technique, but not one that's used very often. But it is out there to be used if necessary. Here's something that's a little more practical for us, and something that you can give a try to, and I'm going to ask that you guys kind of try this on your own. It is part of the case studies, right? So if you guys are doing the case study, you're going into this. But whenever you look at a browser, have you ever noticed that all the different websites that you go to, and this is a great example because I have, look at all the tabs and then look at the icons. So these icons, and okay, so pronouncing this is up for debate, right? So some people will call it the favicon, or I'm not really sure what the right way to say it is, but it's a favorites icon, but I'm not sure there's a proper pronunciation necessarily for the shortened FAVICON. I still call it favorites icon myself, but I do hear people throwing like favicon around, like it's a thing, right? But that icon can be controlled by you. So all you need is the image, and then in the head section of your document, like you link to a spread or a style sheet, you would link to the icon, you would point to that file and indicate its type. Truth is, the only real pieces you need are the link and the href. It's considered good practice to put in the relation and the type, right? Type is probably the most discardable of all of these. Now, in terms of what kind of image you can use, GIFs and PNGs tend to be best, and you want them to be square dimensionally. So the width and the height should be equivalent, and it usually works better if it's a power of 2. So for example, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, those numbers pixel-wise are a good choice. And they can be pretty big, and they will shrink down, but you can control that icon. You can put the icon either in with your HTML files or in the image folder. If you put it in the image folder, right here in this spot here where I'm moving my mouse, you want to indicate the path to it. Not very hard to do. All you need is the image. So I could, for example, take this like dragon image and shrink it way down, but I want you to think about that. If it shrunk way down, would I make out any of the detail? And see, that's kind of like the whole problem, is the answer typically is no, right? If you look at some of these that are more effective than others, you see what Google does. I mean, you can totally identify the Google one really easy, right? By their colors and their G. Ones where you don't have a favorites icon, look at the generic little planet Earth, right? And then Blackboard has their little BB, Apple's got their Apple logo, etc. But you know, I think of like an icon like this as being a pretty effective one. This is one for the Swift programming language, where it's kind of a bird, you know, and you can see that it's a bird. And you identify it with the thing. So what you choose can make a difference. I could probably come up with some little mini icon that looks like a dragon, perhaps. And if, you know, with any luck, you could actually do dragon, favicon, and search it, and here's people that have one, right? It's like I could just go in here, download one of these, link it up, and there it is on my website. And if you guys want, I could actually do that, right? So here's the icon. This one is absolutely huge. You see how big it is? 2,000 by 2,000. You know, and then I'm being really careful here. So these are all stock images, which means you have to actually pay money for the stock images. Just be aware of that, right? You can also, and I'm just putting it out there for educational purposes, you can screen grab stuff and make your own image of it, or you can try your hand at actually creating one. There are on the web what we call favicon generators, where you can, here's one that I typically use, where you can upload images or draw in their generator, and it creates the file for you, and then you just download it. So I'll leave it up to you how you want to do that, but all you have to do is basically find the file, put it in your images folder, put the link in the head section of your document, and you're all set. And then in your tab is your little favorites icon. I consider that kind of important in some ways because, you know, if you have like a brand or color, or a logo or something, there's a perfect spot to use it. Right, this is something that's kind of interesting, this next topic, CSS sprites. Sprites, and you know, probably a good way to talk about this is to actually do a Google search on it and then look under images. And so you can actually see what we call a sprite sheet. So this is what we call a sprite sheet. And I want you to, this is really kind of bizarre. So I want you to picture a situation where you might have a website that you're doing, and you have all these little, like, you know, look like emoticons or whatever, little images you want to use to kind of spruce things up. But what happens is for each one of these, normally you would have to create the image and then make it a single image and then put it in the spot. So every time you use it, you use a different image tag. What if, and this is a different approach, with a CSS sprite sheet, you load up one CSS sprite sheet that's got all the images already on it, and you just pick which spot of that image you're using instead of using the whole image. So the image loads once and then is available for the whole application to load up other things. So this is called a sprite sheet. I've never been a particularly huge fan of sprite sheets, real frankly, but it is a technique that can lend some efficiencies to a website, you know, depending on how graphic intensive it is and how much bandwidth you want to save. So that's technically shown in chapter 7, by the way, but that's just the thing they talk about at this point. All right, so we kind of have been doing this. So the next little segment is like, where do you get your images from? All right, best place to get an image from is you take the photograph, or you sit down in Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever and create it. Those are the best sources for images. Okay, short of that, you guys have been watching me all day here, and I go to Google, I right-click Save As, or I use my snipping tool and grab an image, or whatever. Those are all the different kind of ways you can do it. But ultimately, what most people end up doing is they end up going, you know, to Google most of the time and searching for stuff. But when they're searching for stuff, they're not aware of the fact that not everything is okay to use, right? So here's, I want you to notice I'm in the images area. I clicked on the tools icon, and then you have filters for the size, colors, the type, right? How recent it is. But you know, probably the most important one here is the usage rights, because if it's got a commercial license, so like often what you find is like, I found this killer image of a dragon. Oh, it's from a stock photo site and it's not free. And there's a watermark on it. So if I put it on my website, you can see the branding for the stock photo site on the image. Not only that, but they will hunt you down and try to sue you on top of it all, right? So they have this switch here where you can switch to what we call Creative Commons license, which means you can use any of these images you want for free with no retribution. So this isn't really a great example of images, but here's one that's got all the maps. Now, once again, we are on CSS sprites. It'd probably be a whole lot more interesting if we said dragon and then use the tools and find Creative Commons. So here's all the free dragon images I can use. And you know what? There's seems like there's kind of a bit. Okay, well, these are ones that are being sold. Okay, so here's the free images down here. But then you want to hover over these, and you notice what Google does now is any of these here, and it says licensable, meaning that you can license this and use it and make it legal. That doesn't mean you can just grab it and put it on your web page. So this is really important. If you are doing professional work, all right, so and just give you an example. Let's say you're doing a website that's a fan of a certain computer game, right? If you're just doing it for fans, most of the time it doesn't really matter. But if you start selling stuff on that website, like your own version of one of their things, you really should talk to wherever you got that image from, probably from the company that created it, and say, hey, I'm doing this fan site. I'm I'm not selling your stuff, but we're promoting it, and we want to create a coffee mug for our website, and your dragon logo is going to be on there. Is that okay? You know, and what you do is you ask, and you'd be surprised a lot of times they'll say, sure, go ahead, you know, that's fine. You know, as long as you're not making $1 million off of it, but if you do, you know, their hand will be out, you know, asking for the cash. So it's important, I think, to double check those things. Of course, you can always give a try to trying to recreate things, and maybe you'll come up with something that looks like that, like if you're trying to draw it. But there are people that are really talented, and I look at like my daughter, for example. She's a really talented artist, and she can take like an image that she sees on a computer screen or took a picture of, and then she'll sit there and meticulously recreate it, you know, or put her own flair on it. So that's totally cool. So, you know, those are kind of my suggestions for where you get images from. So you can buy them. So some companies do buy into stock photo services. Here's another example though of, you know, like the Adobe Creative Suite also comes with a stock photo repository, right? And so they do have some free versions of it. So you can try some of this stuff for free and actually get some photos, right? But I want you to notice they charge $30 a month to have access to photos. But chances are you'll come in here, and if I type, you know, dragon and search, you know, they're gonna find like, okay, so this isn't really a great example, but if you go to a stock photo site and search dragon, that you'll find some really, really killer ones. There are some big repositories for those, and many of, you know, typically what you're going to find is better quality stuff costs money. However, and I'm just going to put it out there for you, a lot of clients and business owners are willing to spend that money to buy stock photographs if they really look that good. Not only do they use stock photographs for websites, but I want you to think about this. Next time you're watching like a movie, right? And there's like, okay, there's this police drama and they're in New York City, and they show the guys on the street like cuffing somebody. Then they have a shot of a fly through New York at night or something. They didn't shoot that. They didn't like rent a plane and get the camera out and shoot that. They have these other dudes that shot that. They just bought the footage and they drop it into the movie, and they're only shooting the stuff that's on the street, right? So very common practice in modern media to buy stock photos and stock footage, and you pay for it. And why do you do that? Because they look killer. They look absolutely beautiful. So if you're really doing a professional website and you have somebody that's got beautiful photographs that really work well, it might be worth paying for them. Or you're going to end up hiring a photographer, right? Or hire somebody to do it, right? Some more guidelines though. Okay, they say reuse images, consider image file size with image quality. So you usually want to try to find a balance, right? How long does an image take to load? Well, that you only can really test on actual bandwidth, but there are some estimators. You know, for example, like in the old days when we had like dial-up internet, if I had an image that was 300 kilobytes, I would sit there for an hour to wait for one image to download. No, right? And then we moved up to like T1 speeds, and that same image takes like 5 seconds. And now we have like 5G, and it's like, oh my God, I had downloaded 20 of those images in the blink of an eye. You know, and you don't even think about it. So use good resolutions, specify your dimensions, brightness and contrast. And like I said, I typically find that with digital photographs, I usually have to brighten them to put them on the screen. Yeah, so they say here, make sure that you put in your alt tag, and then be careful about what colors you use. And this is something I talk about a lot. Generally speaking, and you saw when I used that dragon logo in the background of the center box, how the black text disappeared on top of it, like you couldn't even read it anymore. Be really careful about contrast between text and images in the background to make sure that things are readable. One reason why I showed you like this kind of transparent thing, because why do I do that? Because I can still read the words and see the background, but the words needed some background to make them pop out. That's to kind of the Y. All right, we are coming down on kind of the last little areas here, and we are running out of time, so I don't know how much of this I can demonstrate because we got 8 minutes left, but I'm going to attempt. All right. So another really cool technique, and I really dig this one a lot too. In fact, when it first came out, everybody was like, rounded corners, cool, right? And what they have is the CSS command that says border radius. And basically what that means is if you could make a circle, it would be 15 pixels from the center to the edge of the circle, or 30 pixels across, and you can apply that to the corners of a box and get that rounded effect. And the command is really simple. So it's so simple, in fact, that let's go ahead and demonstrate it. So like, I think it was maybe on my, let's save the CSS. On my about page, I had this whatever box. So this will be a good example. For that whatever box, wherever my code is for that, what do we call that? Not just whatever, oh, whatever padding is what there it is. Okay. So on this one, I'm going to do border radius. And let's just do what they did, 15 pixels. And you see how the box changed right away? And you know what? I can make it more dramatic. So I can go 40 pixels. All right. So I don't know if you like that or not, but it's a really simple effect that looks pretty cool, right? It is possible, and I think the slideshow kind of goes into this, that you can actually control all the corners separately. So you can have them all the same, or you can have some square, some rounded, some more rounded than others. Kind of interesting. So this box down here was created with a border radius, and notice the top, right, bottom, left approach, 4 values, once again, where they kind of specified it more specifically. Right, so that's that. Another one that's kind of helpful, now, we did this before with text. Remember we did text shadow? Well, there's also shadows for boxes, and I think this is kind of cool. So I'm going to demonstrate this once again with this like weird looking yellow box, since it's right here. But I can apply to this box a box shadow, and very much like text shadow, has got multiple values. It's X offset, Y offset, blur, and shadow color. In this case, I'm going to do something not too extreme, but I'll do like 7 pixels, maybe a 5 pixel blur, and dark gray. I think that's a pretty good color. And notice what it did here. So it created the shadow. The shadow is white, mind you, right? So maybe dark gray is not a great color. So maybe black is indeed the best color for a shadow. That's a little more dramatic, but you notice how that really pops out from the page, right? And I really dig that effect a lot, depending on how you apply it. In this case, the 7 represents 7 pixels over this way. This 7 represents 7 pixels down this way, and the 5 is how much it blurs out. You can switch these, for example, to negative numbers to change the direction of the perceived lighting. You guys notice how I do that, and it changes where the shadow goes. The normal is to cast a shadow down and to the right. If you make these numbers really small, and I think I demonstrated this last week, right? In fact, or make them 0, the shadow balances all the way around, then usually you want to increase the blur, but the shadow is evenly cast all around, and it makes it look like it's popping forward. Really interestingly, this effect here, if you ever look, whether you're on a Mac or a PC, if you ever look at the windows on your screen, all of them have a shadow on them. Whatever window is forward, cast a shadow on the windows behind. So check that out in your operating system. I think that looks pretty nice like that. So I'm just going to leave it like that. So that's box shadow, very similar to text shadow, but I like that technique carefully. The other thing, and I think we already demonstrated the opacity thing is whenever I have any object that's on the screen that's normally solid and you can't see through it, all I have to add is this opacity control or style to any object, especially one that's got a background color. So like, for example, this H1 has a background that's white. They set the opacity to 0.6, which equals 60%. So the range of opacity is from 0 to 1, just like percentages, from 0% to 100%. This one's set to 0.6, which equals 60%. So it's 60% not see-through is the way to think about it. So 40% see-throughable, so I can see the trees through the box. Kind of a cool effect. I hope you guys kind of agree. All right, last little tidbit here, talking about different color formats, and really this deserves a little bit more time than I'm about to give it, but it is what it is these alternate color formats. So when we started out, we learned that we can call colors by name, we can call colors by hex codes, and we can figure out the hex codes by going to a color picker and then writing down the code. But the more modern technique is to use what we call RGBA color. And you can use it with or without the A, by the way. But what it does is it takes the same values of a hex code and just converts them into regular decimal numbers, so separated by commas. So in a hex code, if you remember, the first two are red, the second two are green, and the last two are blue. That's the same here. So the first number is red, green, blue, and then the last value is A, or what they call alpha, or opacity. So you can control the color and the opacity. So the first three are color. Optional fourth digit is opacity built right into the color format. I really dig that a lot. You noticed in Dreamweaver automatically chooses that as its default color format. You can omit the A, so you can just say RGB 255, 255, 255 and no 0.7, or you can include the A and include the opacity. But if you're not really controlling the opacity, I'm going to argue just say RGB and the three color values. If you are controlling opacity, add the A and the fourth value. Another format is this one called hue, saturation, and lightness, also combined with opacity or alpha. And it works off of a different principle, but it can generate different values. And this is something that is really, I'm not a big fan of using it while I code. If you ever sit for a certification exam, they'll ask you about this, and I don't consider this one really important, but it is a way to control lightness with different definitions. Most good color pickers will give you hex, RGB, and HSLA, by the way. Last slide, folks, and then we call it a day, so we're only 1 minute long, is this thing called gradients. Now, gradients are kind of an interesting thing, but when you look at this image here, I'm just gonna bump it up in size a little bit, and what you see here, this is really kind of interesting because the techniques you see on the screen with this lighthouse bistro are pretty basic. So you're starting to identify the boxes, the drop shadows, the rounded corners, the borders, the padding, the background image, the use of color. You see all these things now, right, as you look at the image. But as you look at the background image here, you notice that the background goes from a light color to a dark blue, or darker blue, right? And in the old days, we used to actually, if we wanted that kind of an effect, we would go into a product like Photoshop and use the gradient tool, choose two colors, and draw a line and create the gradient, and then have the image repeat. And then somebody's like, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Why don't we just build it into CSS? So what they did is they developed gradients directly inside of CSS. So you can indicate your starting color, white at the top, and then the blue at the bottom, and it just makes the transition automatic. Because it's in CSS, it's a lot more lightweight than loading an image and works a lot faster. And yes, there's others other than linear gradient. There's also radial gradient, where it comes from the center out as opposed from top to bottom, but you can also designate other directions, you know. And so that's a little bit of a field of study. But if you're looking for that gradient effect, you don't have to create an image anymore. You can actually do it with CSS code. All right, folks, that wraps things for today. This recording